Welcome to our last Dornsife Dialogues of the academic year, and we're going to make it a fun one. Today, we're going to talk about dinosaurs. It's a perfect time, at least for me, to hear from our experts today. My kids and I have just been watching Apple TV's Prehistoric Planet, the BBC documentary about life on Earth 66 million years ago, and I am easily as excited about it as my kids are. We're all coming away with our own questions. I'm personally fascinated by how paleontologists reconstruct the animal's behavior. And I recently learned that one of our panelists, our own PhD student, Kiersten Formoso, who recently received the Dornsife Graduate Student Communicator of the Year Award, is a credited consultant on the show who advised on how to make the mosasaurs realistic. My 3-year-old son, who has for some reason that I don't understand been lobbying against having to wear a shirt, had a different takeaway. When the giant flying Quetzalcoatlus with a 30-foot wingspan soared onto the screen, he said, "Look, Mommy, he isn't using a shirt." I'm not expecting our experts to take on that one, but I hope that they will give us all some insight into how much we actually can and do know about how these amazing animals lived. So let's get started. It is my great pleasure to welcome our moderator, Michael Greshko, to USC Dornsife. Michael's an award-winning science journalist and writer at National Geographic. His work has also appeared in National Geographic Traveler, MIT Technology Review, Nova Text, and the American Institute of Physics' Inside Science News Service. He's also a frequent guest on a wide variety of TV shows. Michael earned his bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree in science writing from MIT. Without further ado, I'll turn the show over to Michael, who will introduce our special guests. Thank you all again for joining us. I look forward to seeing you back in the fall when Dornsife Dialogues resumes. Have a terrific summer and enjoy the show.
Wow, well, thank you so much for that introduction. And oh my goodness, look at all the guests out there. Thank you all so much for being here. We are delighted to have a chance to talk with you about dinosaurs from fiction to fact, esteemed paleontologists who are going to share their insights with us. Without further ado, Jeff Goldblum, aka Jingmai O'Connor, is an associate curator of fossil reptiles at the Field Museum in Chicago. Jingmai earned her PhD in geological sciences at USC Dornsife in 2009. And oh my gosh, it's Sam Neill, aka Dr. Alan Grant, aka Kiersten Formoso, a vertebrate paleontology PhD candidate at USC Dornsife, and a graduate student in residence at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Jingmai, Kiersten, thank you so much for your time and for joining us here at Dornsife Dialogues.
It's my pleasure, Michael.
I'm excited.
So now is a really interesting time for us to be having this conversation, dinosaurs from fiction to fact, in that, the short term and long term. So short term, these are heady times for dinosaur fiction. We just had Jurassic World Dominion come out just this past weekend. Several weeks ago, as the Dean mentioned, Apple TV Plus released a major series, Prehistoric Planet. But bigger picture too, now is a really interesting time for dinosaur fact. I don't know how many of our watchers are aware, but now is a really exciting time for paleontology in general and for dinosaur paleontology in particular. Something like 40 to 50 new types of dinosaurs are described every year from fossil material around the world. And we are learning so much more about the dinosaurs we've already discovered each and every year. I guess to start for each of you, for many people, their first exposure to paleontology, to dinosaurs, is coming from popular media, things like Jurassic Park, Prehistoric Planet, that sort of thing. So for each of you, how did you get into paleontology to begin with? And to what extent did media portrayals of the science or the animals get you interested?
You want to go first, Kiersten?
Sure, I'll go first. So let me take the sunglasses off, even though there's no brachiosaurus to make me go but still. So I I grew up I was born in New York City, but didn't really know the city life. We moved, further and further out west of New Jersey until I grew up in a really rural county in Jersey, very Appalachian, mountainous, green. So I've always loved nature, and I've always been drawn to kind of the idea of how the nature around me came to be. My mom says, and I hope my mom is watching right now, my mom says that the first job I ever said I wanted was paleontologist. I didn't think that was a real job for a long time, but I was really captured by kind of the past. I loved books on geology and dinosaurs and things like that. The first dinosaur media I can remember watching, and this is funny because I was a little kid at the time, it's dinosaur media, but it was actually Godzilla in 1998. And that Godzilla, of course, had a very theropod-like looking design. And that, weirdly enough, was actually my first exposure to what a dinosaur-shaped animal looked like. And then I got into Land Before Time, and then 2000, Disney's Dinosaur came out, which is pretty formative. So actually, I didn't watch the Jurassic Park movies for a little while because I was so small and they were kind of scary. The first Jurassic Park movie I saw, I actually believe was Jurassic Park 3, one with the Spinosaurus and the T-Rex fighting, and they're on the island. So yeah, as far as media goes, definitely love dinosaur media. I still love dinosaur media, but because I'm just like a sci-fi nerd, I would say is kind of my main thing. Because as a paleontologist, I don't actually study dinosaurs, but I definitely enjoyed early dinosaur media, just as an enjoyer of science and things like that. So yeah, I think that answers the question.
Awesome. Yeah, it does. Now, Jingmai, I know your path into paleontology was a little bit different. Could you walk us through that?
Yeah, so Kiersten's story is one that you'll hear a lot. Like most paleontologists have known that this is what they wanted to do since they were very, very young. And I mean, that's awesome. That's great that they've stuck with it their whole lives. But I would say I'm late to the party. I discovered paleontology in college from, I had a wonderful teacher named Dr. Donald Prothero, and he was teaching classes like evolution of the earth and paleontology. And right away, I told him I want to be a paleontologist like you. But for me, it's the idea of evolution, the concept of evolution and how it works and how complex it is and how it's produced this incredible diversity of life on our planet that really hooked me. But I was already a geology major because my mom's a geologist. So I got interested in geology at a young age. And if you're going to study evolution through the lens of geology, you're going to be a paleontologist. So that's what brought me here.
Gotcha. And so to that point, right, dinosaurs are interesting in and of themselves. They also provide a really unique window into the fundamentals of evolution and also kind of the deep and rich history of life on Earth. At the top, I alluded to, just to give a little taste of what's happening in the field of paleontology in general, and for dinosaurs in particular. We'll broaden out to our friends, the Lepidosauurs, which include our marine reptiles that Kiersten studies. But for each of you, what has been, for your money, kind of the most interesting or surprising development, maybe in terms of method or just new fossil discoveries? What stands out to you as really fascinating or surprising for us in this moment?
I mean, I guess so. I work on the dinosaur bird transition. That's the focus of my research. And, when I was, Kiersten and, had an office at USC, was a graduate student, at that time, the only dinosaurs that we knew that flew were birds, and then maybe also Microraptor. But we considered that Microraptor and birds were part of a single evolutionary origin of flight in dinosaurs. And then in 2015, with the discovery of a Scansoriopterygiid bizarre dinosaur called Ichi, we realized, or began to realize, that flight had actually evolved in dinosaurs probably at least 4 different times. And that completely transforms how we look at these animals, how we look at flight, how we look at birds, and all the dinosaurs closely related to them. And so for me, that was really, really a really exciting breakthrough discovery. But in terms of methods, I would have to say I'm just the biggest fan of this young researcher named Dr. Yasmina Veman, and she uses Raman spectroscopy to unlock all sorts of crazy information from fossils that we never previously thought we'd ever really be able to directly get at. So for example, the whole, are dinosaurs warm-blooded or cold-blooded debate, people would try to get at that answer indirectly looking at things like posture or brain size. And in a paper that came out in Nature just like 2 weeks ago, she's able to use Raman spectroscopy to be like, this is exactly the upper metabolic limit of this animal and that animal, and just and demonstrate for sure that dinosaurs were plesiomorphically warm-blooded, and that some dinosaurs secondarily lost this warm-bloodedness and became cold-blooded. But I mean, it's just, that's so crazy that you can extract that information from fossil bones of any age. Like, I mean, you have to have a right type of preservation, but I mean, this is just one piece of information that she's able to extract using these methods, and it just completely blows me away. And she's just 1 year out of a PhD. Like, who knows what she's gonna figure out next? And I think it's really, really exciting to be able to directly quantify these things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kiersten, what about you? And your work? Oh, please.
No, yeah, totally. I'm really happy that Jingmai brought up Yasmina's work, because that's what I was going to say. You know, really cutting edge molecular things like that. And then for me, kind of more biased to my area of work, I really love the biomechanics gains that are being made in the field. For example, a lab I can think off the top of my head would be like Casey Holliday's lab at Mizzou, where they're reconstructing muscle in dinosaurs based on comparisons to living animals like in crocodilians to determine bite force and other mechanical things behind animals. I'm interested in things like locomotion and movement. So work out of John Hutchinson's lab is really, really amazing. And just work from now Dr. Armita Marafzadeh, who does this phenomenal range of motion work in extinct animals. And so we actually know more about the biomechanics of some extinct things than detailed biomechanics about some living animals, which I think blows my mind. We should fix the living animal side as well. But it is really, really cool that you can get such investment and such a full picture from using, you know, modern methods, CT scanning, reconstructions to make these animals move, which in the case of us, you know, looking at dinosaurs from fact to fiction, knowing how a dinosaur moves is pretty important for, say, the movie industry, for example. You know, if we're going to actually depict these animals in life, it's good to have an idea of what that would look like. So that's kind of one area. And then I also love kind of neuroanatomy stuff. I'm just such a sucker for taking a brain scan of a dinosaur, reconstructing the brain shape and saying, oh, it's going to have decent vision, good olfactory senses, hearing, you know, its brain was more like birds or more like crocodiles. I also really love that as far as modern methods go. So, yeah. That's
awesome. Well, just as a reminder for folks, if you have questions, be sure to put them in the chat. I've got a little window on the side where I can see them, so please, you know, pass them along. And we do have our first question from William. Do you find inaccurate portrayals of dinosaurs in popular media more helpful or harmful, right? Because there's the reach that these portrayals get, but then there's also, they're not 100% accurate. I can think of, for example, those poor broken wrists on all of those poor dromaeosaurs. Oh, my heart goes out to them. So, I mean, for each of you, like, what's that relationship like with kind of this popular portrayal versus where the science is today?
I mean, I don't think it really does harm per se, but I think that extinct animals, especially things like dinosaurs and mosasaurs and plesiosaurs and lots of other animals, are so interesting and fascinating on their own, then there is no need to embellish them in order to make them interesting to the public. So I just kind of find it insulting a little bit. And then as another example, like, I think that it makes also people a little bit disappointed in reality. So for example, this is before my time, but Sue the T-Rex, which is the biggest and one of the most complete T-Rex that is known, right? And it's here at the Field Museum. And I was told that, you know, like when it was unveiled, it had been hyped for like, you know, at least a year, right? We got this big T-Rex, And when they did this really dramatic 360-degree curtain, like kabuki curtain drop, the overwhelming sound that you heard from the crowd was a sound of disappointment, like, oh, because they thought it was going to be bigger. And that's also because of movies like Jurassic Park, where they make these animals like 2 times, 3 times the size that they actually are in reality. So then when you see an amazing fossil like Sue the T-Rex, you're disappointed. And that's that's terrible. So yes, actually, I do think it's harmful. I take back my earlier statement.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. I try to be positive with some portrayals. Like I'll at least point out as science communication opportunity, point out what some animals, what they get right. I'll point out an example in a moment. But I do, to echo Jingmai, yes, I agree that I'll take my friends to the museum and I'll show them this phenomenal T-Rex display at the NHMLA. It's this T-Rex growth exhibit. There's an adult T-Rex, subadult, and like a juvenile. It's just so cool. And my friends will be like, oh, I thought they were bigger. I've had that happen with a lot of people. And I'm like, is that not big to you? That is a carnivorous animal the size of an elephant, if not bigger. That is huge to me and terrifying and awe-inspiring. So yes, I will echo that. That part is harmful, where these animals, I like what you said, Jingmai, they don't need embellishment. And I really fully believe that. But then on the positive side, like, for example, the Mosasaurus in Jurassic World, right? Grossly oversized. It has crocodile scutes. It lacks the tail fluke, right? Things it got right. They gave it the row of palatal teeth. So when it opens its mouth, there's a big scene in the one movie where it goes to eat a pterosaur, and then you can see the double layer of teeth. So I like to point that out, like, oh, this is evidence we have that links mosasaurs to lizards, among other anatomical features. And I can take the flaws in the design and talk about the science. Mosasaurs, by the way, should have a tail fluke. Mosasaurs, by the way, were smaller than this, but still really big, still some of the biggest marine predators of all time. So there's that. Then, of course, there's Jurassic World, just completely making up dinosaurs. I can't tell you how many times I interact with a kid who's like, my favorite dinosaur is Indominus Rex. And I'm just like, oh no. But sorry, I'm sure they'll grow. So I'm 50-50. I think some portrayals can be harmful, just kind of a bummer. It's like, oh, I wish you just went with the real animal because it's really cool. But then always an opportunity for science communication and improving the public's awareness. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and specifically on the Jurassic World mosasaur, I've got a take, and we've talked about it before, but to the point about not needing to embellish, mosasaurs most likely had forked tongue.
The forked tongue, yeah.
So specific to this, or to make it more general, like, to what extent does looking at living animals, in the case of mosasaurs, it might be looking at lizards and other living reptiles, and for dinosaurs, it's looking at birds and crocodilians. But for each of you, could you speak to like how informative it is to look at living animals as we try to grapple with these extinct creatures?
Yeah, I mean, it's super helpful, right? We call it for example, trying to understand dinosaurs by looking at crocs and looking at birds, we call it the extant phylogenetic bracket, which basically means that dinosaurs are in terms of like the tree of life, they fall in between these two groups. So I think you need to do it, but at the same time, you have to be aware that it can mislead you. So like, as long as you have that in mind. But that was one thing that I was thinking when Kiersten was talking earlier about how like we now understand the biomechanics of some extinct animals better than living animals. So a lot of things that people don't realize is that paleontologists will also contribute significantly to biological information, because we're like, oh, we need to understand how these early crocodilians, were moving. And so, but we don't understand how an extant crocodilian is moving. So a paleontologist will end up putting a crocodile on a treadmill and like doing, like rotoscoping or whatever, so that they can understand the living animal, which is now more information available for biologists, but we want it specifically so that we can understand these extinct animals.
Yeah, so we've got actually some additional questions in the queue. Get ready, folks. So one coming in from Conrad, which I think is really interesting, as we're thinking about kind of media representation of dinosaurs and more generally like extinct life. Jingmai, I'd be curious, are there groups that you think are maybe underrepresented or underappreciated in the public sphere? And same thing for Kiersten. Are there, maybe we broaden out to marine reptiles, or even more generally, groups that you think maybe could or should get some more, love in the public eye? This is a question from Conrad.
Yeah, I mean, when people will talk about charismatic animals, right?
Yeah.
In that have great stories to tell, that capture people's interest. But I actually think that every organism, living and extinct,
Yeah.
has a fascinating story to tell. And so I think, we put too much focus on things like dinosaurs that like just are superficially extremely appealing. I think
Yeah.
there are so many interesting stories to tell about other groups. And we were kind of talking about it earlier about how like, where are the poor ichthyosaurs? Like why of all the marine reptiles are people like mosasaur is cool, plesiosaur is cool, like ichthyosaurs, you know but yeah, I mean, I was not a dinosaur head as a kid, right? I came into it very
Sure.
late in life, and I only study dinosaurs by just how my life ended up working out. I did not actively seek out to work on dinosaurs. I just wanted to work on fossils. And now I really think that regardless of what group I ended up working on, I would fall in love with it and find it fascinating and buy everything I could that happened to have that organism on it, which, maybe for some animals wouldn't be very much until the advent of things like Redbubble. But yeah, I think, and I also would say that birds are probably underrepresented. Like, for example, here at the Field Museum, we did this giant mural of Hell Creek fauna, and there's not a single bird in it, even though they're the only dinosaurs that are about to survive this mass extinction, and they're not even depicted at all. And I'm like, rude. But yeah, nobody cares about the birds.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. I agree. All life is amazing. I mean, and there's so much that came before us. If I was to like give some things I would love to see, I mean, obviously more marine reptile action. Jurassic World did a lot, for making them kind of, but only one. Like I want to see more mainstream plesiosaurs, and again, like ichthyosaurs. Ichthyosaurs are so cool to talk about scientifically because they are reptiles that evolved to look so much like a fish, like dolphins do, and we expect that for dolphins because we live alongside dolphins. We see them at SeaWorld. They're familiar to us. I'm like, oh yeah, of course, dolphins, land thing evolved to look like a fish. For people who even know that, they evolved from the terrestrial ancestors. But reptiles did it too. They did it first. They did it really well, and then diversified. So that's just one in my line of work. But synapsids and those early cool carboniferous early reptiles. I don't know, when phytosaurs, the first things to do the croc thing. Well, I guess tumnose spondles were, but there's just so much in the water, things that aren't tetrapods, Dunkleostis, these are things that a lot of people who are deeper into paleo know of, they know these groups. Like you could ask kind of a general paleo fan, do you know what Dunkleostis? They're like, oh, heck yeah. But like, I want more people to know what that is. The early land to sea to land things where they had like a bunch of fingers before we settled on 5 for some reason. I want to see that because it's cool. Like I always tell people, like, do you know how random it is that we ended up with 5 fingers? It could have gone many different ways. And so by kind of giving more attention to those kind of organisms more broadly, I think would be neat. So
for viewers who are not familiar with Dunkleostis, holy cow. I would argue probably the single most terrifying animal to ever have lived in what is now Ohio. It is, I don't know, probably maybe 6-8 feet long, part of a group of armored fish. I mean, this thing is just like a nightmare fish with like crazy bladed jaw. Like just
that's jaws for teeth. So it's very cool. Ohio's never been safe.
So we've got another question from Taryn, and Jingmai, this actually would be a good one for you. We are now at a place with regards to some of the molecular work that we can now reconstruct, at least partially, the color and plumage of dinosaurs. Could you talk a little bit about how this is done and some of the limitations currently?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's okay. So basically it has to do with fossilization of organelles called melanosomes that, at least in derived sauropsids, so like things like birds, have different shapes that correlate with different colors. And they're also really tough. They're very tough structures. So they help protect like our body from, for example, like UV radiation. So like melanin will form in your skin in response to the sun in order to protect you. So this makes them very easily fossilized. And when, for example, when you see fossilized squids with ink sacs, that's melanin that's forming, that's in the ink sacs, that's also fossilizing. So this has been something like in ink sacs that had been known for a really long time. And finally, somebody kind of tried to look for them in feathers. And I think it was Jakob Winter in maybe 2008 was the first paper. And and once it was done, people realized like, hey, let's start looking for these melanosomes in fossilized feathers everywhere. And in the incredible Jehol avifauna, when you have a fossilized feather, mostly what you have are the melanosomes. The keratin matrix in which the melanosomes are embedded is gone. So what you actually get is melanosome-based coloration, which is responsible for things like black, rusty red in the case of phaeomelanosomes, like grays. Sometimes you'll get an alternating pattern of melanosomes, no melanosomes, melanosomes, right? And that when there's no melanosomes, it indicates probably a white feather, because if it's white feathers don't have melanosomes. But the thing is, a lot of colors, and I would say like really the colors that I like anyways, you can see my tattoo, I like bright colors, right? These are structural colors that are actually created by the keratin matrix of the feather. So it basically has kind of like a spongy structure that separates light the same way a prism does and absorbs certain wavelengths and bounces other ones back to you so that you see a specific color. So for example, if you take a scrub jay feather and you hold it up so that the light is bouncing off of it back at your eyes, it looks blue. But if you hold it up to the sun so that light is passing through it and not bouncing back, then it's black. So if you were to take a scrub jay and fossilize it, and you only had melanosomes, you would say from those melanosomes, it was a black bird, but it's not. So it is only part of the story. And we just have to be aware of that there could be structural coloration, as well as other pigments that could be there, that could have been present, but are not being fossilized. But I still think it's a really exciting new avenue of research. Like we've only been looking at these things for less than 15 years. And so who knows what new methods we'll be able to detect. Like I think structural coloration, we can find it in fossils, but it requires exquisite, really, really high quality preservation of the feather in order to get that nanostructure still fossilized. But it has been reported in a few fossils. But so that's something that we really need really good preservation for. But I think in the future with new methods, we might be able to detect pigments and things that we have not yet detected in the fossil record, except in, for example, fossil eggshells, which again, Yasmina Veman now can tell us what color fossil eggshells are based on the pigments that are preserved in them. And hopefully we can apply this to feathers and start to, increase the palette again of our reconstructions, because for a while everything was crazy colorful and then kind of went to like very muted colors. So like, oh, the melanosomes are just telling us really boring colors. And now I think we can start building back more colorful reconstructions.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jingmai. Kiersten, for you, I'm curious, when we think about you're thinking about like the mosasaurs that you work on and other extinct forms of life, like we have an increasingly refined view of what these animals were like, how they moved. I mean, even I don't know for mosasaurs specifically, but I know for other kinds of marine reptiles, we've got fossils that are preserving evidence of live birth. So we're getting, through a lot of what the fossil record can provide, really extraordinary glimpses into the lives of these ancient animals. Is there a limit to how much we can learn? Is there kind of this sort of impenetrable barrier of time that we can't make it through? And if there is kind of, we're always going to have an incomplete gap, like how do we responsibly speculate on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. It's a question that I'm fully aware that I have a very small view of. I couldn't tell you with confidence, oh, we're never going to be able to do this. We're never going to be able to do that. I have some ideas. Like I'll take mosasaurs as an example. Mosasaurs, they're marine animals, so they tend to die, they almost always will die in a marine environment that gives really good chances for really exceptional preservation. And mosasaurs can often be found in what are called Lagerstätten, which is just these areas of high levels of fossil preservation, either many individuals in one area or like very well preserved areas. For example, there's a mosasaur on display at the museum at the NHMLA that has skin impressions and tracheal rings. And there's other mosasaurs that have the impression of the bilobed tail fin, which is how we know they have the fin impressions around the flippers and stuff. So barring maybe color of the animals and maybe the color of the eyeballs or something like that, we can reconstruct a fairly confident mosasaur, even down to like what the skin and scale texture would be like, which I think is really cool. So I think it's amazing what you can get, and that's just mosasaurs. I mean, I think about even like the first, this one goes out to Jingmai, like the Archaeopteryx fossil that's like, you know, it's flat in Solnhofen, where it came out of, which is another Lagerstätten. Just beautiful. So we're getting just amazing glimpses of these animals just frozen in time, almost exactly confidently what they would have looked like, you know, barring things like colors, but as Jingmai just discussed, we can start to estimate what they are. So I think there are maybe limits to, well, I think I was looking through the questions myself. Someone asked what sounds dinosaurs would have made. That will not fossilize. Maybe something like vocal cords. Like I think Parasaurolophus as a great example of dinosaur, big hollow crest tube chambers where it would have, you know, driven air through it. And so there's some displays at various museums that estimate what the sounds would have been like if they blew air at this speed or this speed. But of course, we don't know if they had vocal cords and what the vocal cords would do to that sound. So again, estimations based on the fossils and like pretty decent ones. So yeah, there are limits, but I think science is so good at making nice educated guesses, you know, like we're not out here making stuff up. Like we're like, okay, based on this, based on its relationship to this, based on this aspect of the fossil, I think we can get pretty decent reconstructions of them. Now, as far as like the molecular stuff, like, oh, could we ever reclone a dinosaur? I don't know. I'm going to err on the side of probably not. DNA does have limited, we know how long DNA can last. DNA degrades when it's exposed to water. As an example, water is a lot of the earth, especially through time. But maybe with cool work like what Yasmina is doing, we could get some proteins, parts of a, I don't know, a gene, I don't know, just really far down. So that's me being hopeful. I hope so. That'd be really neat. So anyway, it's me done rambling.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm curious, you know, one of the things that, you know, makes dinosaurs so interesting, I think, to a lot of people is not just sort of the extraordinary and, from our point of view, sort of bizarre, strange forms these animals could take, but also kind of the narrative of how they died, right? I mean, a major and relatively new component to the story. Jingmai, you work on the branch of the dinosaur family tree that did not die, though many of them did. We'll get to that. I'm curious, you know, from your perspective, what have been the biggest advances in our understanding of this extinction event that occurred 66 million years ago on a very bad spring day for the Northern Hemisphere? I mean, with after effects that lingered more than a day. We'll talk about that. But what have been sort of the biggest advances in our understanding of not just that extinction event, but how some dinosaurs in the form of birds made it through this apocalypse?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, that's the most interesting question that anybody studying fossil birds can work on, like how this selectivity of the end Cretaceous mass extinction, and it's incredibly relevant. Like, so a lot of people sometimes say paleontology, what's the point of that? You know, right now we're in a 6th mass extinction, so understanding selectivity in mass extinctions is very important for us to understand like who's going to survive and why. And so, you know, birds survive the 5th mass extinction when a bolide impacts Earth around the Chicxulub, you know, in what's modern day Mexico. And but the thing is, there were a lot, it's not like all fossil birds or all birds from the end Cretaceous survive through. There are lots of birds that go extinct. It's only one group of birds that survive. So why, right? But in order to get at that, you need to have fossils that can tell you really what separated this group of fossil birds that survives, crown birds, or a group called Neornithes, basically like the group that includes all birds that are alive today. And what separates them from these other groups of these other lineages that were very successful during the Cretaceous. So without fossils, how can you tell how they're different, right? So recently we are starting to get, I mean, the fossils are very, very rare. Fossil birds are one of the rarest groups in the fossil record, but now we're starting to have some evidence that can help us understand this better. But one of the interesting things is that we're seeing is that it doesn't seem to be like the shape of the skeleton, that doesn't seem to be a factor that separated them. Like you see a lot of features that you see in modern birds also evolving in parallel, independently in this group of birds called the Enantiornithes. That was the dominant group of birds in the Cretaceous. So they lose their teeth and have a beak, just like living birds. And they also start to have certain cranial modifications that I won't go into in detail because I'll just bore you guys. But we're starting to see that like a lot of skeletal changes that are related to flight possibly evolve in both lineages. So what is it that separates crown birds from stem birds? And I think it's different. I think you can't point to any one factor and be like, oh, that was it. Like, for example, some people have tried to say it was because these Enantiornithines lived in forests and the forest all burned, with these fires that were started by the meteor impact. But I don't think you can point to one thing and say that's what it was. I think it has to do with certain characteristics of reproductive behavior that were unique to crown birds among all dinosaurs, such as perhaps the presence of a membrane called a chaliza. So you have your egg and you have your little yolk inside, and probably all reptiles except for crown birds don't have a chaliza. So that basically when the embryo starts to develop, it adheres to the inside of the eggshell, and if you move the egg, then it will kill the embryo. But modern birds have this chaliza, these membranes that hold the yolk right in place in the middle of the egg, and it allows birds to rotate their eggs without killing the embryo. And that's something we don't have fossil evidence of, like how would this tiny little membrane fossilize, but at the same time we hypothesize that this was probably this was probably something that separated crown birds from all other dinosaurs. There also seems to be possibly differences in the digestive function of crown birds. Their digestive system was more efficient, possibly. They were able to feed on detritus because basically, we had a nuclear winter after the meteor impact, so all plants would have died. So if you could feed on something like seeds, which are detritus that are left over even when there's no new photosynthesis going on, then you have some food resources that can get you through this environmental crisis. And it seems that perhaps more primitive birds were not able to feed on those structures for whatever reason, we don't really know. And then also maybe differences in respiration, and maybe even differences in plumage, as well as differences in metabolic capabilities, like that all together made it so that only this one group was fit enough to get through, and all the others, that even though they were very successful for 80 million years, still go extinct when this environmental crisis occurred. But it's something we really don't know. This is just like throwing out hypotheses. It is something I'm working on. It's something I'm really interested in, but we really don't know. And that's kind of what makes paleontology so exciting, and I guess also makes it so that people in these Jurassic Park movies can just do whatever they want, because we really don't know.
Yeah, and one thing to Kiersten, I'm curious, this was not just an extinction on land. This extinction also thoroughly reshapes the oceans, and this is the moment where we lose our beloved mosasaurs. Could you speak to what we know about kind of how this extinction event played out in marine settings, maybe for some of these reptile groups?
Yeah, well, I mean, so most extinctions, from just my general, view of all extinction, I'm thinking the Endemic mass extinction, the Triassic one, that marine networks collapse first. Marine trophic systems are very fragile. Even today, marine ecosystems are not doing so well because of climate change. So when the bolide impact hit, and it stopped photosynthesis globally, that is going to completely wreck marine systems, because a lot of marines, the kind of foundation of marine systems, just like on Earth, relies on photosynthetic organisms, but on a more limited scale. There's not many things in the ocean that just eat plants and their photosynthetic organisms. A lot of kind of just carnivory in general. And so once the photosynthetic things went out in the ocean, that was it, all the way up to the top highest trophic levels, which is where the marine reptiles would have existed. And so that is probably what happened, what led to that. Now, there were a lot of things that did survive, and I actually don't know the details of why smaller marine things, supposed to be marine reptiles, died, but probably because they weren't at the tippy tip top of the trophic web. They were kind of more secured, kind of at the bottom levels and layers where they could have, it's almost similar to birds, maybe feed off of this kind of detritus, kind of rotting world of the ocean as the world was recovering, something like that. So yeah.
Gotcha. It does make one wonder, and this is actually one of the questions in the chat. What happens if this asteroid doesn't hit? What happens if the Chicxulub impact doesn't happen? Do we have, evolution is random and contingent, but do we have even an inkling of a sense of what Earth would have looked like, 65 million years ago if Chicxulub doesn't happen?
Well, I mean, even if like the bolide impacted at a different time during the day, like at a different spot on the planet, it also would not have caused the mass extinction. So it like really was just like such a random chance. And I guess if you believe in a multiverse, then there's lots of worlds where dinosaurs are doing just fine and humans never evolve. And yeah, I mean, I guess I think with climate change, certainly it would have affected these lots of groups of dinosaurs, and some groups of dinosaurs were already on the decline for other reasons prior to the impact event. But and dinosaurs still are alive and well, and still the most diverse group of land vertebrates. But I think probably we would still have many of these larger dinosaur groups still alive. Maybe they would have decreased in size during periods of periods of environmental cooling or climatic cooling. I think it's really difficult to predict, but I would say that they'd still, non-avian dinosaurs would probably still be around.
Mm-hmm. And just to make this clear for viewers who might not be up on this, the reason that the time of day matters and where it hit is because these rock deposits in what is now Mexico had a lot of sulfur in them and that sort of thing. And so vaporizing that rock and injecting it into the upper atmosphere led to an especially potent bout of global cooling. Is that right?
Yeah. And
Okay,
also,
cool.
yeah, it messed up the carbon cycle and caused all this ocean acidification, which is also something we're doing, by the way. And yeah, which is all just a lot of really bad things.
To zoom back out, so we've been, in the science for a bit, and I want to zoom back out to kind of where science and society meet. And a question from Bridget is a great way for us to do that. In recent years, there's been a number of high-profile public auctions of fossils. I mean, quite famously, Sue, the T-Rex in the Field Museum was sold at auction. In the years since, we've had a number of high-profile auctions, including Stan, the Tyrannosaurus that was auctioned at Christie's in 2020, Big John the Triceratops, other material, including dinosaur and marine reptiles such as mosasaur material is in private collections around the world. What's your read on kind of private ownership of and kind of the public sale of fossils? Like, how does that affect the science and the public perception of this fossil material?
So for that, I hate when I get someone who messaged me, or like someone who doesn't know what paleontology is, or like a friend from high school. They're like, the first thing they always ask me is like, oh, aren't these fossils like worth a lot? You must be doing so well money-wise. And I'm like, no, fossils don't normally, they're not supposed to go for like $8 million or whatever the numbers are. And so I think it leads to a really harmful perception of the public of what fossils are, what their value is. Fossils value is scientific value. It's not supposed to be monetary value. I'll get messages from people like, I found a fossil, how much is this worth? I'm like, I'm not going to appraise a fossil for you. That's not why I study fossils, not why I look for fossils, not why I like fossils. So I think that causes an issue because, again, people hear these insane sums, Nicolas Cage, he bought a dinosaur for whatever million. And I'm like, that is not normal. And we're not normal, but rather that's not what fossils are supposed to be. And so that's kind of my take on it. It's like it distorts what people view of what the value of a fossil is. The value of a fossil is its scientific value. It's natural history heritage, that's the value. So yeah.
But at the same time, not every fossil has scientific value.
Yes.
Like especially like inverts, we got a lot of them, so, but even, when we go out collecting in the field, we don't bring back every fossil we find because we don't have room in the museums. You only collect things that are that have information, that are scientifically valuable. And I think like we live in a capitalist world, and as much as I wish we didn't, we do. So I think it's unrealistic to demand that all fossils cannot be bought and sold. I mean, at least we're talking about the United States here, where we are. And to say, because that's what a lot of paleontologists are calling for. All I think we should do is regulate the sale of fossils. I just think we should have legislation in place that says if a fossil has scientific value, then it needs to be in a public repository. So then if a fossil comes out that somebody's trying to sell into a private collection, we can say, no, that fossil is important and we need it in a museum. And then there can be a little committee that evaluates the request and decides whether or not that fossil has to be part of the public collection. I think owning fossils is something that actually inspires people to want to be paleontologists. In fact, I think people who went out and collected fossils or bought a fossil when they were kids and then became a paleontologist, like, I think that's a better inspiration for paleontology, for real paleontology, than somebody who's like, I watched Jurassic Park and I wanted to be a dinosaur because that's just what paleontology is like. Because it's not, right? But actually like owning a fossil, looking at a fossil, like having this tangible trace of an animal that lived millions of years ago in your hand, that's what's so exciting and so thrilling and really can infuse people with a sense of respect and wonder for the natural world. So I'm all for it as long as it's not detrimental to science.
Yeah, I think to this point, oh, sorry for interrupting, Kiersten. I was just going to add that, for viewers, the US is kind of, in terms of the legislation around fossils, the US is a bit of an outlier with regards to the rest of the world. In the US, to Jingmai's point, if you're on, let's say, federal land, let's say managed by the US Bureau of Land Management, you have to have a permit to dig fossils, and that material must be, under US law, put in a public repository like a museum. Where things get a little interesting is if you find fossils on private land with the landowner's permission. Maybe it's your land or you're digging on somebody else's property with the landowner's permission. That fossil you can sell pretty much free and clear. And often scientifically valuable material is found on private land, which, but in other countries and places around the world, for example, in the Western Canadian province of Alberta, every fossil that's found there is by law part of the province's paleontological heritage. And so
you can still collect the fossils. Like you can find a fossil, as long, like not in Dinosaur Provincial Park because it's protected park, but if you find a fossil outside the park, you can pick it up and keep it, but you technically can't take it out of Alberta, and technically you are like curating it for the government, but you can collect fossils. So it actually isn't, I mean, it's kind of intermediate between a place like Mongolia or China, which is like all fossils belong to the government. They're all, a scientific resource.
Mm-hmm. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We've got a good queue of questions here, and I think we're going to try a little bit of maybe some lightning rounds. I'll throw a couple in here. We'll go through some of these questions here. So I guess one to start. You each have a time machine. You can go anywhere, anywhen, hang out, and you'll be safe when you do it. You're not going to just like go, oh yeah, 200 feet deep and without scuba gear or whatever. But you can go anywhere, anywhen to look at a snapshot of an ancient ecosystem. Where do you go, Kiersten?
Oh, a speed round. Oh gosh. Well, I'll be honest. I would love to see a big theropod in real life. I think it'd be really neat. Just like, what do these animals actually look like? So, it's T-Rex, Carcharodontosaurus, Giganotosaurus, Spinosaurus, Allosaurus, even. It'd be neat. What does it actually look like? How does it behave? Something like that. And then Mosasaur also. Can I do the Cretaceous and do like an ocean vacation animal
Sure.
one?
There's coastal ecosystems, sure.
Yeah. So
Jingmai, what about you?
I would go see the Ediacaran fauna because I mean those animals, like the fossils are so obscure and vague, and like what are they, and some of the earliest macroscopic life. So yeah, I'd go down to Australia like 640 million years ago, whatever, and see the Ediacaran fauna.
Yeah, these weird sort of, even some of the symmetries too, that just start to look like weird like bronze seals and stuff. It's like, no, that was a creature that lived in the ancient muck. The for each of you, what is the single biggest misconception? Maybe it's something that's propagated in pop media or news or whatever. Most annoying, most annoying misconception that you encounter in your work. Jingmai, I'll start with you, and then we'll bounce it to Kiersten.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess like people still think dinosaurs are extinct, and I'm like, the birds, you know? And also, I guess
Yeah.
it really annoys me how all these like dinosaur chicken nuggets throw pterosaurs and like Dimetrodon in there. I'm like, can you just stick to dinosaurs and also tell everybody they're made of dinosaurs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I honestly saying like I hate when people say, "Oh, this is a living dinosaur," and they point to like a snapping turtle or a crocodile. I'm like, we have living dinosaurs, and it's not that, or like a lizard or something. Like that's really far off the tree. And so again, SciComm opportunities, but it is a bummer. Like, you know, living dinosaurs is not just something that looks scaly and old and ancient. Dinosaurs were a specific thing. They're a specific type of animal, you know. So I guess it's one of my peeves, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Not necessarily your all-time favorite, but a favorite that comes to mind right now. Favorite extinct creature or something that, you know, separate from our little time machine, John, that you would love to see kind of in person. Kiersten, start with you.
I mean, this answer changes. Right now, for some reason in my brain, I would love to see a terror bird, a forest wrasset from South America,
Yeah.
like something that'll be so familiar, right? Because it's gonna be like a big, tall, stalky bird, like an ostrich, but also not familiar at all. Also, like a literal re-dinosaur, like they redid the dinosaur thing. So I think it'd be neat to see a terror bird, if not anything else I study, you know, mosasaurs, other things. But yeah, that'd be cool.
For viewers who aren't familiar, they are called terror birds for a reason. They are scary. Jingmai, what about you?
Maybe Tanny's Strophius, like
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
bizarre Triassic reptile with the like super long like fishing pole neck. Like, what was that for? What? Like, yeah, I mean, it's really bizarre. So I dig it.
Awesome. Just going through some of these. I have a queue here too. I've got my queue. I've got this queue. I guess for each of you, what is the role of imagination in in your work as scientists? You know, coming up with method or even trying to fill in the gaps in our understanding of how an individual creature looked and behaved.
Well, I think like what I've noticed in my work is that the human imagination is just so limited, and we can't like, you know, we're trying to figure out what these animals were doing, but we're like, well, you know, we're basing on what we see in living animals, and like we try to imagine, but how can you imagine something that you've never seen that's completely different than anything that's alive today? And so that's what is really cool about sometimes these fossils, like something like Ichi. It's like the original Scanceraptorida that was found. People looked at its weird finger and was like, maybe I imagined it was like this, and then a better fossil's found, and we're just totally wrong, you know. And so, you know, what I see is that, yes, we do need to try to use our imagination, but it is really, really difficult for our little primate brain, or I mean, fairly large primate brain, but like to really think beyond what anything that we have seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like with regards to the question, you know, they ask about like paleo scientific consultants, like should we restrict ourselves, you know, to hard facts or speculate wildly? I mean, you know, there's a balance. There's some things we just won't know. And so, you know, for paleo art, I mean, I think about Prehistoric Planet, the sauropods, the big dreadnoughts with those inflatable air sacs that were depicted, you know, so people are like, oh, that's ridiculous. We don't know they had that. It's like, yeah, but, you know, we don't know a lot of things about these. So why not, you know, and at least, and justify why, you know, so that's kind of the balance. I think you can use your imagination to reconstruct amazing, fantastical things, but grounded in something. Well, why did you reconstruct it with air sacs like that? Oh, well, because they have all this pneumaticity going all the way down their, you know, cervical column. So that's kind of the basis for that. So yeah, like we won't know, and that makes me sad, but it's humbling at the same time. And we do the best we can do with the fossils that we do find. So that, yeah, that's the answer.
Well, Jingmai, given that you're dressed up as Ian Malcolm / Jeff Goldblum, I think it's only appropriate to start with you on this one. If we could build a Jurassic Park, should we? Why or why not?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, first of all, we live in a world that is fraught with serious problems. And so why would we be like, well, let's just ignore all the poverty and the hatred and all these serious problems, and let's just go, mess around with some DNA and create Jurassic Park and create more problems for ourselves. Like, I mean, to me, it's absurd, and it's actually really selfish. And I would say no to Jurassic Park. Also, it doesn't end well. And yeah, dinosaurs are much, better predators than we are. So I think it wouldn't be good for us for human dominance, but maybe that would be the best way for us to go out, like we create a Jurassic Park and that creates our own extinction. Like, that'd be pretty cool.
Yes, I would echo the no for similar reasons. Like humanity has so many other pressing problems that if we could clone a dinosaur, no, it's fine. I don't think it's all right.
Make yourself a veggie.
Yeah, it's okay. Let's cure disease. Exactly. Yeah, let's cure diseases. So yeah.
Gotcha. And for each of you too, we've been talking throughout about some of the methodological advances that we're seeing in paleontology right now, whether it's using modern animals to better understand how extinct animals moved, to using new chemical insights into the fossils themselves to reveal traits of those extinct animals' anatomy and physiology. What modern tools and methods, this is from Caleb, what modern tools or methods in paleontology do you think will have the greatest impact in the decades to come?
Probably CT scanning, that's really just opening up like a huge new amount of morphological research, morphological information that we can extract, like looking at the brain and looking at the inner ear and looking at the microstructure of the bone. I think, that's really telling us a lot of new important clues about these extinct animals.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would agree. CT scanning, and then of course some of the cool molecular paleo stuff that's being pioneered by researchers. Also, really quick, the last question, like from Evan's 4-year-old kid, what was the largest dinosaur? It's Argentinosaurus still, I think. Just
it's not Patagotitan.
I was about to say
Patagotitan. Okay, yeah.
But one of these big titanosaurs, this group of sauropod dinosaurs that just got so big.
So big, yeah.
Too
so
big.
It's probably a tie between one of these.
Always better.
Well, terrific. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you, Jingmai and Kiersten, for your time and your insights. Thank you to all of you who are watching, and thank you to USC for staging this Dornsife dialogue and the others of this academic year. If you want to rewatch this or watch any of the other dialogues from this past school year, you can go to the Dornsife Dialogues webpage on USC's website. You can also go to the Facebook page and YouTube channel for more. With that, I am Michael Greshko with National Geographic, and thank you all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and remember, dinosaurs are all around us in the form of birds. So when you see one fly overhead or on the sidewalk next to you, think about the fact that the age of dinosaurs never really ended.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for
Bye.
watching.
Thank you for watching.